Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, for this fourth day of the 10th Community of Users meeting. Today we will be discussing about CBRN matters. I will unfortunately not be with you all day, but while you will be surrounded by very good people in sharing capacity, I will be downstairs in the water safety and security. What I would like to say as an opening is that the community of users is taking shape in that we are now really entering into a phase where synergies can be perceived. Synergies among research projects, which are regularly gathering, exchanging information, synergies between these research projects and policy sectors, gathering with policymakers, listening to them, to their needs, anticipating what could be done in support of the policies. Synergies with industry SMEs, that is really speaking about innovation. How can we anticipate that our research development, your research development, will be brought to the knowledge of industry SMEs, actors, and brought to potentially to the market at the end of the process. And synergies with practitioners, listening to them, and how to make sure that they are involved at different steps of the research process, not at the end as cosmetics. Really saying, okay, you are police officer, firemen, the emergency people, you need to be involved at the design of the research, even in research programming, being consulted, and then in the process of research, be consulted at regular interval, maybe involved in validation, and also consulted with respect to market dimension. This was, it's something that was not conceivable 10 years ago. Now we are really close to it. We are really putting this on the table. We are making progress in this respect. In the CBRN area, well, we are in a very, very good moving dynamics as well, because now we are exploring new ways of helping, in a way, innovation. And, well, you will hear this today with the Encircle cluster, where we know that we have a kind of coaching dynamics to be made, for example, to SMEs which are developing technologies, how to make sure that SMEs are helped in their research efforts and to the market dimension, to try really to ensure that their research tools, technologies, and so on are helped to the market. But it needs support, it needs help, it needs advices. And while you will hear today what the Encircle cluster is doing, and you will certainly hear what are the steps that we are taking with respect to this coaching issue, clustering, they will explain you better than me, and the research and innovation action that we are also programming. So in 2017, we are the first call related to research and innovation actions. There will be projects that are now negotiating, that will be coordinated by SMEs and will be very closely linked to the cluster. In parallel, we know that we have also to improve the interactions with practitioners, and we have explored the possibilities to have networking activities of training centers related to CBRN. The issue is that in Europe, you have a certain number of training centers that are used for first responders, for risk related to CBRN, but which are, I would say, used only for training. And these training centers are not connecting with each other. You may have, well, nationally, several training centers which know each other, but for example, French centers will not speak with German, Dutch, Belgium, UK centers. They do not know exactly what they are doing. While there is a fantastic critical mass of knowledge and infrastructure which is available. So the idea, and it will be also be presented today, it's the e-notice network. The idea is really to try to gather these training centers and say, okay, what can you offer? What can you offer in terms of infrastructure, not only for training, but also testing tools and technologies in the CBRN area. And we will see whether it works, because at the end of the day, if I'm people like you that needs to have infrastructure to test tools and technologies, why should I go in the countryside somewhere without any means with respect to I would say, well, practical means to test my technologies, while there are centers which have everything ready to help you. So really to have dynamics where we know exactly what is being done by different centers in Europe and use them for their capacities, not only for training, but also for testing. And who knows, you know, it could develop into a kind of certification mechanism. We don't know how it could happen in the future, because let's imagine that you have a new detection tool for CNB that you test in 3 different centers in Italy, Germany, UK, and that these centers tells you, yes, this technology is working well because we have tested that with practitioners and they're happy. This is our feedback. We can have already a kind of very clear views on the expectation from users, and we can, I think it can have also an impact on the market, because we say, well, this is mature enough, and it's not a formal mechanism, certification, but it might have an impact. So using better the resources that we have. So, well, I will stop here. I will wish you a very, very fruitful meeting. I know it will be, because there are a lot of people who have a lot of things to say. I would like also to stress that we are now in the process of exploring ways to make that this community of users becomes sustainable, in a way more institutionalized. We know that we have now realized that it meets some needs. It is filling a gap with respect to interactions between different actors. But this community of users is purely informal. It has developed because well, I had this idea 4 years ago. Now it is coming up to a high level. It has the support of Commissioner King. There are other commissioners who are also informed about this, Avramopoulos, Signalides. We have a high-level support at this level. And now we are requested to explore what could be done to make it sustainable and more visible. So just to let you know that we will be discussing more and more the opportunity to develop a European innovation partnership that hopefully will be developed and adopted, I hope, before the new commission, that is before next spring. And I will come back to you in this respect, because you will be consulted, and all the more because CBRN could be a good guinea pig with respect to an EIP. I mean, if we develop, we have already the operational blocks which are in place. We have I would say, the philosophy also in place. With respect to the Encircle cluster, we have aspects related to market, I would say, place, online marketplace. We have many different blocks which are already in place. What needs to be now elaborated is the governance part. And the governance part is more complicated. That, for example, I had a discussion with water, where it's quite vertical. You have one Directorate General which is coordinating and very clear links with member states. Here we are dealing with security, crisis management. You have from 8 to 10 Directorate General involved. We have member states to be involved through different committees. We have European intergovernmental agencies which are also involved, even UN conventions, and we are dealing with security. So we are close to, obviously, sovereignty and classified information sometimes, not always. So all these elements makes this EIP a little bit more complex, but not impossible. So we will be working on that this year. Don't be surprised if you are indeed seeing this in the mailing that I will send on the CoU. There will be some bilateral discussions. Any kind of tips, advice that you might have when you will get mails, you will be asked, like everybody, what do you think? Is it something that you would support? We will need support from the member states. We'll need support from different DGs at high level. And we'll see. Because if it works, well, it's a new way of working. While you have experimenting this while being here in a numerous way, let's make it happen on the long run, because it's a new way of working that is, I think, prone to a lot of successful interactions. And with this, I would like to, well, I will come back, because I will be sharing actually the water safety and security meeting downstairs, and I will pop in from time to time to the meeting. But if you wish to discuss specific issues related to CBRN, well, I will be around over lunchtime at the end of the afternoon. Don't hesitate, I will be there. I will pass the floor to Victor Voitas, who is actually the colleague who is responsible for the policy area. And then Victor will pass the floor to Christina Longo, who will be your chairperson today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Good morning, everybody. My name is Victor Voitas. I work in DG Home in Terrorism and Radicalization Unit, and I'm responsible for CBRN issues. Those who were here in September last year may remember that when I was speaking here, I was pointing out the need for more political support for CBRN issues. Now, as Philippe mentioned, there is some interest from our commissioners in the community of users. There were also some developments in CBRN area since that time. In October, we had an action plan on CBRN. I will present it later this morning. We had also, for example, a call for proposals where CBRN was one of the priorities. And if I were to write a briefing, for example, on CBRN, I would say that, for example, up to 18.5 million was made available for CBRN. Of course, comparing to research, it's nothing, but still, for us, it's a significant amount. Now, in reality, it's not that beautiful, because this 18.5 million is not only for CBRN, but also for public spaces, for CIP, for explosives. And in reality, it's, well, public spaces, which is a priority. So in October, we had a counterterrorism package where action plan on protection of public spaces was the main document. CBRN was, let's say, piggybacking on public spaces. Now, of course, it's not it cannot be a surprise for everybody. If we look at the terrorist attacks over past few years, well, none of them were with CBRN materials of agents, and basically all of them were related to public spaces. So it's normal that the protection of public spaces is a major priority. Today, for example, we have a conference going on not far from here, where mayors of EU cities came together in order to discuss how to better protect cities and other public spaces. So CBRN is gaining some attention, but there is still not, it's not the level of protection of public spaces attention. Now, on Monday, there was a discussion about procurement, and there was, in one of the presentations, someone mentioned demand pull and supply push. So in case of CBRN policy, it's definitely, we look at the situation where there is, let's say, supply push. So what I mean by that is that politicians, of course, they wouldn't want anything CBRN related to happen, and if it happens, they would like us to be prepared. But the thing is that as long as it's not a top priority, it's basically up to us, so people involved in CBRN, including researchers and practitioners, to draw attention to solutions, to projects, to everything that is useful in CBRN area. And the problem that I have, I mean, community of users has been around for a few years. It's the 10th meeting. I remember sitting here during the first meeting discussing with some of the colleagues who will be here later today as well about CBRN. And honestly, if someone asks me what is the added value of community of users, what it delivered, it would be difficult to say it in a, well, our Commissioner King, he likes short sentences and direct, messages. So it would be difficult to say it in, one short sentence, what is the clear added value of our meeting today. Of course, it's very good to meet. I know that there are the cooperation between researchers, for example, and first responders, practitioners, it developed nicely. It's benefiting. There are some projects which were born in this room, let's say. But I still believe that there is a need to develop like a clear message for the politicians, for well, my superiors, but also in member states, on what is the added value of these meetings, of research, CBRN research in general, what concrete deliverables we can present, because the problem with CBRN is that it's a very technical matter. So it's difficult to, sometimes it's difficult to sell very concrete solutions that you may have developed in course of the project. So what, well, I'm not a researcher myself, so I also need, let's say, more straightforward messages. And what I would like, and what I would encourage you to do is, when you have a project, when you develop certain initiative, to bear in mind that in the end it has to be sold to someone who is in charge of the budgets, someone who is in charge of policy, and well, it has to simply be a deliverable which people like me or people like me in member states, colleagues in member states can go to the hierarchy, to people who are actual decision makers, and tell them, look, we have a very nice solution. We want to implement it. It was developed in a research project or whatever. And because otherwise, I still see, even though we have an action plan and it's very, very good, and I will present it later, and I still believe that there is a need for clearer communication with policymakers, for clearer definition of solutions that we can provide to concrete problems, because we all know that CBRN preparedness is still lacking certain aspects. So I hope I was not too direct with what I said, and I hope well, we can find commonly a solution for the problem that I believe it's there for superiors and for top of the management of governmental agencies and so on. So thank you. I hope we will have a very useful day today, and I'm looking forward to any comments you may have and any questions. I will be around for the whole day most likely. Thank you.
Okay, we can continue with the first roundtable. I invite the speakers to reach the stage.
No, just I need to. Are you addressing the people? I'm Jean-Luc.
Okay, before the roundtable starts, we will listen to the presentation of Mr. Jean-Luc Gallat from the UCL University.
Thank you very much. So it's always a difficult task to set up a scene, because what to say that you do not know as expert and professional. So what I will say today, you know it all already. So I'm just trying to make different elements together and to provide you some kind of summary. So when I first came across CBRN issues, it was received a very low priority. And as I understand for Victor today, it hasn't much improved, so unfortunately. Because when I was joining the army, the only thing I knew about CBRN was in the context of Cold War nuclear threats, and what made, unfortunately, a very small Belgian city famous, Ypres, for the use of Yperid, so a blister agent. That's all what I knew about it. But since then, much attention has been paid to the use of this agent. During the Iran-Iraq war, we received in the military hospital in Belgium these Iran soldiers that were exposed to blister agents. So that was the first time that we thought, oh, this is concrete again. This is concrete again. And then afterwards, we were confronted to nerve agents. So as you know, the first nerve agent, it was synthesized just before the Second World War, and sarin, which is one of the most famous one, unfortunately, during the Second World War. So then we were really all shocked by the use of these agents against civilian populations. So Saddam Hussein in Halabja against Kurd population. And unfortunately, the story didn't stop, because you all remember well this attack in the metro of Tokyo using sarin again. And unfortunately, more recently, the use of chemical weapons repetitively in Ghouta and in different areas in Syria. So it means that, okay, chemical warfare agent and their use is steadily increased. The risk is increased, so we have to consider to be prepared to answer quickly and appropriately. But this is, of course, not the whole picture of the story. We have now more and more to be confronted with biological threats. And this comes from reports from North Korea, for instance, or from Daesh, who allegedly say that they will use biological weapons. They are producing biological weapons. And we find some kind of evidence that it is indeed a threat. And on the top of this threat, we have to consider another additional factor that is not only Daesh or North Korea, but that is simply the demographic changes. As you can see here, we have a really dramatic growth in the global population, world population. So scenarios differ a little bit to define to what extent it will keep growing that way. But what is really remarkable is the fact that all this population, most of the population and the growth is recorded in Asia and Africa, which make nearly 75% of the world population. And this is going to increase when you see the sharp and rapid increase of this population in this part of the world. Unfortunately, that's also in this region that the hotspot surveillance for biological disease are the lowest. So we are totally blind to this type of biological risk in this country, totally blind. And this was really longly and in detail explained yesterday in this meeting organized by DG Research and DG Santé, so I'm not going to come up on this, but this is an evidence. And so population density combined with global change, combined with globalization and climate change, has really put a lot of pressure on fragile states. And that's where biological threats, by the way, is to be feared. That's where everything will probably start. So we have kind of a problem here. So this was a lot. This is the consequence of what I just said. A lot of outbreaks, some of them very dramatic, and that was really heavily discussed yesterday. It was also discussed this week in the ECO Forum, Civil Protection, that was held at the same time, unfortunately, as the CoU, so on Monday and on Tuesday. And this, how to contain outbreaks, how to be prepared, and how to simplify and speed the response to this type of outbreaks was heavily discussed, unfortunately not always with practical solution. And things can even get worse than a classical outbreak, even if Ebola was a dramatic outbreak. If you think about pandemic, and this is what was discussed again yesterday in detail, we know nothing about the pandemic except that it will occur soon. But that's about what we know. And we have two frightening models of that. That's influenza, that affected the world many times and will affect it again. So we know, that's for sure. We just don't know when. And the progression of antimicrobial resistance that is really a world plea. So this we know, and we have to be prepared, and we have to answer, and we don't know exactly how to do. And when we talk about intentional release, not natural release, intentional release of bioweapons. The first striking, really the most striking things was the Ameritrax, so in the follow-up of the crash of the World Trade Center. But these put a lot of tension inside the member state, European member state, because we cannot count the numerous copycats of anthrax release with this white powder. So this seems to be simple because this white powders is nothing than white powders most of the time, nearly in every time, except that it takes and sucks a lot of energy from the first responders and from the lab. So we have to do something to master it. So to master all this challenge, there is the CBRN action plan that Victor was just talking about. I'm not going to explain it, of course. That will be his task later on in this morning. But this is indeed something that is like a guidelines for our scientific project in the future. And 4 main pillars are really detailed and translated in action plan in this document, and you find them all here, but you have the internet link, and Victor will explain this to you in detail, so I'm certainly not going to do it right now. Just interesting to do. But what is interesting for us as scientists, researchers, industrial stakeholders in security is to see what is the impact of past research in EU security. Did we really have an impact on the European security? Did we influence it in the good way or not? This can be really, this is at stake. When you look at some of the reports from the media, they are very critical about the results that we produced, actually. And we can look ourselves in the mirror. We don't need the media to do it. And we perfectly know, because this has been widely discussed inside the CoU, that there are many problems related to the lack of efficacy of our results. And I'm not going to detail all this. You know them all. It's just a summary of all the factors that have been identified as a cause of failure and not going into the market. So the market is clearly the objective, and it was repeated by Philippe, and it's, I think we are all convinced that we are here for that. And of course, if you consider the market, that's what Philippe's introduction was also explaining. You need to have a strong link between different key pillars that are security stakeholders, policymakers, and solution or innovation providers. So the demand side needs to fit the supply side and be policy compatible. This we all know. That's nothing new about it, and we know, and it's insisted, Philippe insisted again and again, but we know about it, that we need to meet the needs of practitioners, and there are only 2 big sectors that can do it, big companies, of course, SMEs, supported by academia, and this we know, nothing novel. But what is really difficult into that, because the view we have and the will we have certainly is that involving end user is far from easy. And this was reviewed again on Tuesday inside this BAO. At what phase should we involve the end user? If it's too early, they just are not prepared to do it. They are not always keen to be involved in scientific project. They have other things to do. They have their core business, which is not science. They are not available. They are not always research-minded. But it is because they have another scope. They have another focus to work with. And they have really a lot of difficulties to cope with this administration of H2020. And it will probably not improve in the future. So this is kind of a problem. If you look at SMEs, they also have their own major problems. Heavy administration is also a burden for them, not only for end user. The lack of human resources to, to handle this major H2020 project. They do not have their own research department. And market accessibility is difficult. That's why we have some kind of new project ongoing to try to tackle this problem. They are supported by academia, so you would think, okay, this may be a good solution. But academia, they have also their own priorities, which is not necessarily the market, which is publication, which is curricula, which is basic science in place of applied science. So this is not compatible with the model that we want to put into place. And academic freedom, we know about it. So don't ask them to set priorities. They will do what they want, because that's how it works in the academic work. And so for big companies, a different problem. They are well equipped. but they want to follow their own tempo, they have their own priorities, and they have their own market. So do they need H2020 project? I doubt about it. They may play with it, but they do not need it to survive. So we need to fit all these constraints into one model to make good science and science that is productive, which is not easy. That's why European Commission, and this is Philippe, set up this CoU to ease the transversal flow of information between every DGs and to connect now with national and regional platform. That was also a session that was held on Tuesday. So the national platform and several examples were discussed here by colleagues present in the room. So this is certainly something he wants to do to build synergy. He said that in his introduction. With many projects, ongoing projects. You know this project. I'm not exhaustive here, but some of them will be presented and summarized here. But what I would like to insist is this new strategy inside the EU, which to me is really crucial, is not to make new science, a new scientific project, but to set up projects that are really strategic because they cluster a lot of stakeholders inside the same view. So you have Encircle. I'm not going to explain. Clive will explain to it nicely in a couple of hours, I think. And so this market cluster is, of course, more business-minded. It's to reach the market and to help SMEs that face the problem I discussed to go into the market and to push innovation. This is clear. And it's very good to have this strategic project because it's a very new approach. And by the way, this project, what is interesting into Encircle is also that it links this consortium Encircle with research, really true research project. 3 of them have been for the first time selected this year, so Cosmic, EU Sense, terrific. And there is a strong link that is legal, scientific, ethics, and so on, between Encircle cluster part A and the part B. This is very novel. This is also very complex, and we discover every day the complexity of this game. Anyhow, is it strategic? Yes, it is, and we have to succeed with it. And about this European network of training center, which is more operational, that's only end user. Olga Vybornova, present here, will explain to you, so I'm not going to detail that either. But the goal of this network of centers is to create really an EU capacity in CBRN training. This we need, because all these actors, they don't know each other. So the link will also be made with the pan-European network of practitioners. That's another strategic view of the Commission. And I think that we have about 10 of these networks, 5 from last year and 5 this year. And maybe what is also interesting is that this project is really preparing and building a European mapping of all this training center capacity, and Olga will explain to you what it's all about, and that the Commission wants already to access this data. This is not to say, oh, this is a very good move. That's just to highlight the strategic importance of this work. If a Commission right after the start of the project wants to have the data already, it means something. It means that we are really in the heart of in the core business, in the heart of the problem. And we also, with these projects, link with DEFCO and the CBRN Center of Excellence. You see the mapping and the regional secretariat, because DEFCO wants to train these people from the neighboring European countries. And for training, you need training center, and you need the best one. So again, a very straightforward link between the strategic project he noticed, Pan-European Network of Training Center, and DEFCO. And that's what DEFCO wants to have this data on training center. So it makes it all coherent. So just to finish, about scientific advances, you know what we need. I mean, I will only repeat what was already registered in Eden and what is continued in the dynamic catalog of Encircle. That's technologies that allow to protect the workers, that allow to improve the situational awareness, either by drone, mixing drone and sensors, using robots, and this you will see with toxitriage, for instance, RockSafe. Yesterday, the importance of rapid diagnostic tests, point-of-care testing was also heavily highlighted, so it's certainly something that is a gap for the moment. Using biomarkers to better appreciate the exposition to toxic, to biological agent is also critical. To have a syndromic approach, not only to have detection of one disease, but based on a panel of symptoms, being able to define as quickly as possible what is the problem with the patient is also essential. The place of next generation sequencing that will allow you to have all the information of a genome, of a virus, of a bacteria, right in the field, aside of the victims. This is a revolution. This is, of course, interesting. And digitalization of data, tracking, tracing this data, transmitting them to the crisis manager, to the authorities, the national authorities. It's a gap, and it's crucial. And there are a lot of projects trying to address that. And finally, issues of decontamination and monitoring decontamination. Also a lot of projects going on this. So it's certainly something that is ongoing and that we need to push forward. But we need to connect all these tools together. And there is a lack of standard. When you look in the Wi-Fi built-in connectivity of this different tool, there is no European standard. Absolutely not. So it's a major gap. And so digitalization of data is essential. Internet of Things, this coupled with it, it's also essential. But all this needs to be integrated, of course, within EU policy and the axis of prevention, preparedness, and response. And so to finish this short overview on scientific advance, I would like to present you a very strange beast. That's, you will hear about it even if you're not biologists. That's what we call CRISPR. And if you want to know the significance of CRISPR, I will tell you afterward, because it's really genetic terms. So I'm not going to bother with you. You are not supposed to be genetician, and it's not the purpose of this talk, but just to tell you that CRISPR is a very new way of introducing pieces of gene into any genome you want to manipulate. And it's very easy. You don't need to have a Nobel Prize. You don't need to be PhD to use it. It's really commercially available, which means that you can introduce new genes inside a viral genome or a bacterial genome. So you can do that for good things, but you can also do that for bad things, as usual with, high technological breakthrough. And this, I want to warn you about this possibility, about this potential misuse of new technology, and it's not only me saying that, it is widely reported now in the media and by some really high experts that we need to be cautious, especially with this Daesh and North Korea business ongoing, that this technology could be used to do other things than good things. So this, having said that, I conclude. So this axis of stakeholder research policy, this is the goal of the Commission and the CoU, to make a network and build synergy between all these clusters, network, platform, and agency. And we need to have a transversal collaboration between defense, security, and health. And by the way, health has already progressed by designing this One Health concept. So as we can see, the dynamic everywhere is to collaborate. And this implies also to collaborate between different EU agencies, which is easy to say, which is much, much more difficult to do, actually. And to do what? But we just have to translate project outputs into outcome to product that are really useful for end user. Again, easy to do, but as you know, not done for the moment. And for that, we really need to develop metrics to measure the impact that we have on CBRN research and on the needs of the end user. I wish you a very fruitful day, and I finished my talk with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gala. Is there any question for Mr. Gala? later? Okay. Okay, so we can start with the first roundtable of today's workshop, which is entitled Science to Science. I am Cristina Longo. I work for the Research Executive Agency of the European Commission in the unit dealing with security research funded by the EU. We manage projects funded through the FP7 NH 2020 program, covering different fields of security, including CBRN-E issues. As you know, and as has been already highlighted by my colleagues, the CBRN issues have been addressed by several projects funded through the programs, research programs of the Commission, and have been and are still one of the main areas of intervention of the EU security research. Within the community of users, we are mapping these research projects with the aim of avoiding fragmentation and to use the results to build synergies amongst the projects. And today we selected some of the projects funded by the EU to be presented and discussed with you. So we can start with the first presentation, which is about the project Toxic Triage. It will be presented by Mr. Paul Thomas from Loughborough University in UK. Please.
While I'm waiting for the slides to come up, Victor, you wanted a short, snappy, short sentence. Okay, so here it is. Capacity scales with connectivity. And I'll just leave it there for you. Power of your technology at the moment is determined by its connectivity. Capacity scales with connectivity. Right, having got that out of the way. I've got an impossible task here. I'm going to talk slowly, but the slides may move quickly. Toxic Triage has 7 objectives on the plate. It's a large menu, it's a feast, and I'm not going to cover all of them with you this morning. I was asked to highlight real results for you today, so I'm going to do my best. We're at month 30 out of 48, and we've just had a large cluster of technology deliverables become due in the last few weeks or so, and we're now moving into the testing and dissemination phase of the project. I saw this as a birthday card a little while ago, and it sums up my nightmare as project coordinator of Toxic Triage. I present to you 2 of the highest motivated fetchers of tennis balls from deep water on the planet. They know everything there is to know about the retrieval of tennis balls from water. But I want to make their life easier. I want to kit them out with good technology and capability so they can be more effective. And there they are, loyally struggling with completely useless contributions from the scientists. So this summed up for me the worst case scenario for the project, that we produced beautifully made components and tools that were absolutely useless for the people who were trying to undertake response to CBRN crises. We use a lot of different people who don't know much about decontamination lines and NATO doctrines and the different ways that organizations and people work. So we put talking to practitioners right at the heart and start of our project. And we have to come up with common words to mean the same thing to different people. Principally, where do we place everything? So we'd have to place everything in the hands of the user, but where we think it might be useful, when you actually get into a decontamination line, you realize that all your great ideas are completely useless because they have nowhere actually to put your technology, and it's a very wet environment with sprays and corrosive agents everywhere, and people with limited views and restriction and can't actually hear or see very much. So we've come up with a series of ACI maps that are developed really by the aviation industry to enable us to place actions and technology into specific locations and parts of the CBRN response. And we can break it down into the various aspects that you'll find in a CBRN crisis response. So that is a collection of all the things we're due to test in the next coming 12 months. And I'm just going to highlight a few of them. So point-of-care diagnostics. If you have a look at the signals, the molecular signals in people's breath, skin, and saliva, it looks like this. These are really complicated chromatographic analyses. And many of you, I'm sure, have heard about breath analysis. But I put this slide up so you can see just how much richer skin and saliva are in terms of the information available for your point-of-care test. The real point we're doing now is we're burning people with radiation. It's okay, it's part of their cancer therapy, but we're getting signals from radiation burns, and this is useful to us to see whether or not it's possible to detect a radiation injury quickly. And the nature and complexity of these signals is enormous. We have more effort and more energy and more late nights from my research team than I've seen in the last 30 years going into solving this problem. However, the good news is that the preliminary results indicate that we've got a panel of markers for radiation burns detection. These are in breath. So we think it's possible now to do point-of-care testing at triage for radiation injury. This is 1 hour after the burn, and we're looking at different tissues and different sites of burn and the development of the injury over time now. And similar results are going on in pesticide poisoning, and the data from this work is now being worked on by computer scientists and mathematicians to see whether we can have a deep learning, machine learning, or artificial intelligence to come up with adaptive diagnostics so that you can recognize the emergence of new biomarkers in a general population from rapid screens such as this. We started the project, writing up the project in 2014. We put a social media element in it. People at the time asked me, oh, do you really, is that really necessary? Isn't that just a bit gimmicky? A year into the project, people said, oh, social media, we like that. This year, it's when is the social media element going to be ready? So at the moment, our team are monitoring the social media in detail of what's coming out of the UK and Salisbury. We're mining social media, and we're producing this type of dashboard here. I can't really point things out to you, but on the right-hand side, you've got the fake news bar. These are social media messages being released by people like Russia Today and the Daily Mail and other sensationalist tabloid-type newspapers and other uninformed and unhelpful actors. On the very left-hand side, you have the official messages being put out by the police and the medical services. Yeah? It shows you the levels of anxiety within the messages you're seeing. It shows you who are the verified users, who are remote users who have absolutely no idea what's going on at all. Okay? It took about 30 minutes for Russia Today to start broadcasting inaccurate and unhelpful information following a sea chemical event last summer on the south coast of the United Kingdom. It took the official agencies 90 minutes to come up with their first social media release of information and guidance. That's an hour too long, I would think. So this is something we think is going to become more important as we were discussing decontamination today and how you manage civilians in a decontamination line. And the fact that they will be Googling what they should be doing and what should be happening to them as they're waiting to be treated is going to cause problems for the management of those people as you're trying to look after and care for them if you have large numbers of them. Also, dealing with healing and community responses, social responses. We've been talking to religious and faith leaders and asking them for advice and guidance as to what is appropriate messaging, what are appropriate acts, what are their needs post-crisis response, how can the operation synergistically, I think is the key word of today, interact with voices who will be listened to probably with greater care and more trust in many communities than official media might be. We have, I talked about this cluster deliverables, so they're coming up now. So we're trying to produce easy to digest, straightforward descriptions of the technology. These are backed up with huge, weighty telephone directories of technical detail, but really what you need to know is what they do and why they're useful. So we have a technology catalog now, and really what we're trying to get across is the answers to these questions. And so we've got units that fit into remote systems, be they land vehicles or airborne platforms. We have standoff detections, we have breath analyzers, and these are all now ready for testing in the next few weeks, I hope. And these are technologies we're trying to score against already well-established platforms. So we're trying to evaluate them critically from the point of view of the practitioner community. And these, I think, is more or less where we've got to in terms of technology development. In terms of evaluation, it's tricky. So you have two opposing forces within your evaluation and technical program. You have the practitioners and user community who want to demonstrate capability and want to run a field exercise according to their protocols and doctrines. And you have people like me who are ignorant enthusiasts, the worst possible types to be in a controlled environment, wanting to test things and experiment. These are incompatible objectives. So trying to bring researchers like myself and highly trained and skilled blue light responders into the same environment in order to undertake evaluation so that everybody understands what we're trying to do is a challenge. We've broken things down into critical segments. This avoids problems to do with classification and time-sensitive information and operational capabilities. And we test things in critical segments. Each critical segment can occur at any time and any place in a complicated and emerging crisis. But here we have three, raising the alarm, sending your second wave of casualties in, I guess, so people with inadequate PPE, and then finally getting to business with cleaning up the mess. And so we have to prepare sites. We were blessed by a visit from Kathleen, part of the e-notice team, who joined us last week in Athens. She shared a great deal of wisdom and expertise with me, generously, and she also advised in a very sensitive and effective way how we set up, or how we might set up and standardize our field tests with what's going on elsewhere within the European community. But essentially, we have to produce an environment that's going to enable technology readiness levels 6 and 7 concepts to be properly worked with and evaluated. And it means from now until October, this is where we're going to be working in trying to get scientists to put their technologies, which are the blue lines, into these kinds of environments. And then they have 2 days to train individuals from the CBRN commands and specialist units to use the kit. So this is what it feels like for me as we move towards the field tests. In case you're wondering, have you ever thought what it must be like to be in a cavalry charge? And then have you ever thought what it must be like to be on the receiving end of a cavalry charge? I don't exactly know where I am in that picture, but this is how it feels right now, as far as I'm concerned, as we move towards Athens and those field trials. It could all go horribly wrong, and I'd be left up with a boat and 2 oars and some confused animals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the very interesting presentation. Is there any questions for Mr. Thomas? Okay.
Hi, my name is Josephine Ford from the Joint Research Center, the CBRN CoU task force. I was just wondering, how do you get your hands on the chemical agents for testing the detection equipment?
the question is, how do we conduct live agent trials? We worked very hard on that at building the consortium. I'm delighted to answer that question and tell you that we work with Paula Vanninen's team in Helsinki as part of Verifin, and we have a series of visits of our technology providers to Verifin's laboratories where live agents are being used. In my group, we're sending a team out very shortly to look at detection of anthrax and ricin using nanopore technology sensors. That's how we do it.
And will you be able to bring those, some live agents to the Athens field testing area, or how is that?
No, we will not do that. We are working on simulants that have the same physical chemical properties as a chemical agent and enable us to use that simulant across the whole site. So it's going to be an oily liquid that is volatile and enables us to look at surface deposited hazards. And here's the kicker. It also needs to be able to be ingested so that we can look at its signal within the human body, so it needs to be safe as well. So we're looking at a vegetable product. So that's how we're going to do it.
And then I presume your reference materials are also simulants for calibration of the equipment.
So the calibration of the equipment takes place in a variety of contexts depending on what it is you're actually doing with it on the day. So when we're calibrating in Verifin, we'll be calibrating on standards of live agent. When we're calibrating on a field technical exercise, we were doing testing on the simulant we're using on the day. The simulant testing in the field technical exercises is to do with operational effect. Okay? It's not to do with proving the efficacy of the sensor towards the targets. That technical testing should be done in Verifin.
Okay, thank you very much. There is another question, I see from there.
Yes, my name is Martinez Potter from Ozone Solutions. About 5 years ago, we developed cylinders, which are very, very close physical properties, but also response to all the detectors. One concern we have regarding your exercise is how do you prevent the data and knowledge generated by cylinders from actually becoming a terrorist threat? In other words, how do you prevent people from learning how to shut down the network using vegetable oil?
Okay, so the signals we get from our simulants do not align and cannot be confused with the signals that we get from live agent. That's one of the specifications of it. Just to reassure you, I saw my first armor-British spectrometer in 1985 on a bench at a government laboratory, and I've been doing research into explosives and chem agent detection since that time.
Okay, thank you very much. We can proceed with the second presentation, which is about the project RockSafe. It will be presented by Mr. Michael Madden from Galway University in Ireland. Please.
Hello, good morning. So I have quite a few slides, but I will not spend much time on them because they're there since they are published. So the RockSafe project, which is about, acronym stands for Remotely Operated CBRN Scene Assessment and Forensic Examination. And our overall goal is to try to change how CBRN scenes are assessed rather than sending humans into a situation that has unquantified risks. We want to quantify those risks, and we also want to send in robotic systems to assess the scene and to collect forensic evidence. So to that end, the overall idea of RockSafe is that when there is some situation, whether it's an industrial accident or a CBRN attack, we can survey the scene with lightweight drones that will collect images and also will have lightweight chemical, biological, radiation sensors on them. Relay all of that information in real time to a command center that will display mapping and other information, analyze all of that information in real time as well, understand the threats, and change or provide pertinent information to at the fingertips of the people working on the scene. And then that can help plan further sorties by these drones to go out and collect further information with specific sensors, and also plan the dispatch of ground-based robots which will have specific tools to physically collect evidence. And all of that evidence then can be shipped for labs to analyze, and things transmitted back to our center when that information comes as well. So, you know, we feel that there's clear benefits to sending out robots instead of humans. In the worst case, if robots get contaminated beyond recovery, we can abandon them and the data will have been streamed back. So you know, the loss is only simply a financial one, because we record and relay all data immediately. And you know, the other thing is we think it's very important to use artificial intelligence, reasoning, information retrieval, and all of these tools and technologies, apply them in this kind of context, because it's nobody's everyday job to collect CBRN contaminated evidence and assess scenes like this. So anything we can do to help them with their reasoning and planning, we believe is positive. So our consortium shown there, and our position is not during the response in that time, but in the CBRN forensic investigation, where we want to protect life, reduce threats, preserve evidence. We've been, as with other projects, we began very early talking to users to understand their requirements. Going back to sort of talks that we've seen earlier today in Jean-Luc's talk, it's very important to have things that are aligned with user requirements, and so we spent a lot of time on that. And based on that, we have defined some operational scenarios. For example, a train that may be derailed carrying contaminated materials, and we want to be able to assess that, or a stadium where there has been some substance released and causing panic there. So, to show you some of the technological advances in the project, we have got chemical sensors for air and ground vehicles, air and ground robots, the lightweight chemical sensor, an airborne one, and then also on our airborne drones, we are collecting samples that are brought back to a landing pod, and more substantial analysis can be done there with somewhat heavier equipment. So our heavier gas chromatography and QPAS sensor for doing more substantive analysis of chemical data. There are prototypes of them. We've got biological sensors, a lab on a chip, being developed by Microfluidic Chip Shop in Germany, that's able to identify some types of DNA within 90 minutes at the moment, and they're hoping to reduce that even further. And we've got radiation sensor modules that being developed by Tyndall National Institute in Cork, able to operate, which are very lightweight, very robust, and very sensitive, and with very high sensitivity there on, for example, American. Then to analyze all of this data, well, we need to gather and catch all of this data. We're using artificial intelligence in my group, so that we can look at streamed images and identify objects. This is as we collect huge amounts of data, we want to be able to focus on the parts of the data stream, the imagery being collected that are of most use, and not just look at blank area. We've also, to support all of that, built a virtual test bed using a game engine to produce realistic kind of test bed and realistic imagery that we can then try out ideas on and do preliminary training of our software systems. We take that information as we analyze images and analyze data from sensors and understand further the scene. That allows us to think about and to reason about where the most likely places are. So initially we might have a kind of a uniform expectation that there is a threat somewhere, but not know where within the scene it is, of radiation, for example. We might have some preliminary information from the crime scene manager that first responder said they thought was a radiation detected in some area, so that will increase probability there. If we send out our drones and image the whole area and we see something like damaged vegetation in this region here, then the probability of that being is increased in that region. We can also take into account geographic and wind conditions and so on in that reasoning. And then we might dispatch the drones to go in much more closely and do just in a smaller area, with radiation detectors, which have to get much closer to their source. And when they detect something in one area, then that becomes even more probable. And meanwhile, because the radiation is now an explanation for much of what we observed, the likelihood of a biological threat has now consequently gone down because all of the things we see are explained by the radiation threat that we have discovered. Other partners then, INOV, are developing nice interactive user interfaces with maps and overlaid images to help people understand all of this information, put it at their fingertips. ARM, our drone partner, are developing integration with turrets and landing pods. Scorpion are developing this mechanism to be lowered from a drone with a cluster of sensors on it to do analysis at a spot. REMDA are developing their forensic evidence collection grippers on a ground-based robot with the various different types of sample collectors for different types of evidence, and a landing pod that a drone can land on to dispatch samples to do this sort of preliminary analysis of samples inside the warm zone. So overall, that's a snapshot of RockSafe. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Questions for Mr. Mann? Yes, please.
Sure. So the question is what is the TRL level of the project? This is a research and innovation project. Overall TRL level is at TRL 4 to 5. Some components of the project, since we are using commercially developed drones and ground robots, for example, will be at somewhat higher TRL, and some of the more speculative parts of the project may be at lower TRL, but the overall TRL of the project is 4 to 5.
Any other questions? Okay, yes, please.
Okay, so the question is about chain of custody. We do a few things in that. So firstly, all of the samples, any physical samples, we have developed collection mechanisms and that with RFID tagging for all of the samples so that they're tracked like that or tagged like that. When, for example, the ground robot is collecting a physical sample, it is videoed by an aerial drone so that we have further record of the location and time stamping and all of the rest. The data is all managed in a secure manner with non-repudiation and logging of all data and prevention of any editing of the data. And we are then taking other steps like that so that when the data is collected, we make sure that it is tracked at all times and recorded at all times.
Okay, I also have a question for you, if I may. We all know, we discussed already the importance of working in research with practitioners. You also mentioned this. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to know about your experience in this field and the difficulties you encountered or the added value that you can tell us.
I think we have been very fortunate in the RockSafe project with the end user practitioners we have worked with. So managing work package 2, which was about requirements gathering and end user requirements gathering, that was led by Peter Daly of the Interagency Emergency Management Office in Ireland, who has a long experience of involved in analysis and threat detection and chemical weapons inspection and many of these kind of activities. And so, and he has a great network of contacts that he used. He, as well as our own end users within the project who have always helped to inform us as well. He's been in contact with, I think he interviewed about 80 different users, whether these are end users or potential kind of sellers of technologies or those kind of things. Interviewed about 80 of them to understand their needs and summarized all of that information in some very substantial deliverables that were done in the first year of the project and really are informing everybody else's work beyond that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. So we can proceed. Sorry.
My name is Oscar. I'm first responder of the Basque Country Police Department. I'm explosive ordnance disposal and CBRN. have to take care that when you talk about using ropes, I have 20 years of experience working with ropes, you have to notice that if you are working with the ropes inside the building or on the floor, for example, in the tap in the metro, you always have to get closer to the place that you are working with. I mean, the person who is working with the rope, who is manipulating it, can be 200 meters. He must be quite close to the rope, because it's not the same in open air, working with the ropes. You can go send the rope over there, 200 meters, there's no problem. But in the moment you get inside the building, there is not the same reach of the signal to work with the robot.
I think I understand the point that you're making, that signals can be limited once you go indoors. It is also, once you're underground, you do not have GPS, for example, which is another limitation that we have to be aware of. The project partner, Riemde, who is developing the ground-based robots, and Aram, who are developing the aerial robots, have quite a lot of experience in these things. And they're, Riemde, for example, their robots are already used in bomb disposal, and so they use networking technologies that even if networks are jammed, that they can try to continue to communicate with their robots. So we are certainly aware of those technology limitations and try to work around them.
Anyway, although even if you use repeaters, so you can duplicate the signal from the robot, it's not the same working with the robot in an open area that working here. If you use the robot you have shown there, the Allen Vanguard Defender, I use it, I have it. We have 6 units of it. It will be very difficult to move in this area because you have a lot of chairs.
Yes.
So you have to take care of the size of the robot and what you want to make with it.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely, and our contingency on that part of the project is that where something is just completely inaccessible, where we need to collect some evidence, and it is completely inaccessible by the ground robots, then the aerial drones are adapted to be able to try and go in and retrieve information, if you have to go to a somewhat inaccessible place. Of course, flying aerial drones indoors also has its own challenges.
It's a good problem inside. Many thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. We will proceed with the next presentation. I will give the floor to my former colleague and friend, Margarita Goulart, who is Research Program Coordinator for the Joint Research Center. She will present an overview of the JRC actions in the field of CBRN. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christina. So I'm Margarita Goulart. I work for the Joint Research Center of the European Commission for the Euratom Coordination Unit here in Brussels. One of my main tasks is coordinating CBRN-E activities in the JRC, in particular the JRC Task Force for the Centers of Excellence that I'll talk a little bit about. I'll give you a very quick overview of the JRC for those who don't know us. We are the Science for Policy Service of the European Commission, so we're the in-house scientific service of the European Commission. Therefore, our research is quite applied research because we are at the service of the different DGs, and we're also obviously at the service of the EU member states. We have 6 facilities in Europe. We have the headquarters in Brussels where I work and 5 facilities in European member states. From another site here in Belgium, in Gil, to Seville in Spain, Ispra, a big site that, our biggest site actually is in Italy, in Ispra. We have a nuclear site in Karlsruhe in Germany, and another in Patton where we used to be the operators of the HFR reactor. We have our work program now organized in terms of priority nexus, and as you can see, one of them is civil security. Our work program is reviewed every year, and we have a rolling work program for 2 years. So every year we do a horizon of 2 years. This year we'll be working on 2018-2019, and our work program includes now around 800 different work packages different projects. Those are from different types, from institutional research, so for the institutional priorities, to, for example, the most applied ones for third-party work, but including also Horizon 2020, what we call indirect actions, where we can collaborate directly with member state consortiums for specific collaboration purposes. In terms of CBRN-E security, we work a little bit, we take a role which is interesting of being a little bit the pivotal point of a number of different initiatives, because we're at the service of different, our different partner DGs. We collaborate with them in the different aspects of their particular mandate in the CBRN-E area. So we work extensively, of course, with DG Home, but also with DG DEFCO, with DG Trade, with DG Move, and other DGs. In all of them, we provide our expertise regarding CBRN-E security in the different aspects that interest them. So we can make a very nice liaison between these different mandates and these different interests. Then we also have a strong role already historically in terms of the external dimension. So the collaboration in security with partner countries of the EU. And there, of course, there's a preeminent role of the EU CBRN Centers of Excellence that are managed by DG DEFCO in cooperation with the External Action Service, but we also collaborate directly and represent the European Commission, and in some cases, the European member states in forums in the International Agency on Atomic Energy, with the United Nations in the UN SCR 1540, with the OPCW, the GICNT, which is the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, and other international very important forums. So we have a very strong role there, and we have historical collaborations that we've established with all these intervenients, which can be very useful for research projects and for capacity building projects that you may be interested in. Then, because all of this field of research, as I said, is a very applied research, we also have very good connections and excellent working relationships with the standardization organizations. We have a status, a very neutral status in these terms, because we have absolutely no commercial interest. So we have free access to all our standardization technical committees in the European Union Standardization Organization, so CEN and CENELEC, where we can provide our technical input to the discussions, but we are not voting members. So, to summarize, and because I don't want to keep you for very long, and the JRC indeed does a lot of work in various fields, including CBRN research, the topics that we are working on, and that I'll give you a few examples very briefly, are these. So we work, as I said, on standardization. Sorry, I'm going to turn this a little bit so that I don't break my neck. Can you still hear me? Yeah? So we support standardization. We work quite a lot on CBRN-E detection. So, okay, we've started out having much more expertise on the RN part of detection, because historically the JRC has been created by the Euratom Treaty, so we have a very strong radiological and nuclear research program. But we are evolving more and more to apply those lessons learned to other areas of CBRN-E detection, such as bio or chemical or explosives detection. There we not only support the development of technology, but also the assessment of the performance of commercially available detectors in the market. And I'll give you an example of that. We do a lot of training at the EU sector, the European Nuclear Security Training School, but not only. We have extensive training collaborations. We have the program of RNCIP that I believe you already were briefed about on critical infrastructure protection. We have groups working on trace explosive detections and simulants for explosive detection, and also on drug precursors and drug profile studies in the European Union. And we work in partnership with this EU CBRN Centers of Excellence network that I was talking to you about. We also have activities embedded in terms of export control of dual-use materials. We participate with DG Home in the definition of the lists of these dual-use materials in CBRN that we should be attentive to, and we also help partner countries of the EU to upgrade their legislative framework and their capacities to make a proper control of the trade of these materials to make sure that they don't pose a threat. And we have a very small but very excellent nuclear forensics program in which we are able to give support to member states that don't have the capacities for nuclear forensics. We support them, and we've done that in the past. When there's a seizing of material that needs to be analyzed, we can provide that service for the member states. Okay, so I wanted to stop in this slide a little bit longer because now I'm going to just give you a few examples. I will not be able to cover projects on all of these areas, otherwise I would be here until the end of the day, but feel free to come to me at the coffee break and I can point you to more information if you're interested. So, these activities, we framed them very much, or they were very useful in the implementation of the previous action plan, the EU CBRN action plan between 2009 and 2015. That's when the EU sector training school was set up, for example. That's when we had a large program of assessment of performance of RN equipment that I mentioned. It was the ITRAP program. We developed also a EU CBRN-E glossary, which is available, and you'll have it. You have the links in the slides if you want to explore it. And we've provided support in other areas that I already mentioned. In the new action plan, we are planning to continue to apply our capacities in the areas that continue to be priorities, such as training, exercises, cross-border exercises, reach-back systems, support to the modelization of dispersion, etc. This is an overview of the EU sector training school. The big advantage of the training school, it's at the disposal of the member states, so it's a matter of being contacted, establishing a collaboration, and we can define trainings that can be implemented. We are doing 2 large-scale trainings, one in association with DG Home and one with DG TAXUD with DG Home for law enforcement agents and with DG TAXUD for custom officers, and that's been running already since 2016 and will continue. The interest is that these training schools have the equipment, the materials, the nuclear materials, the radiological materials on site, so the trainings are extremely realistic and have access to the live agents. The ITRAP program is now in the phase of transferring the technology that we've developed for assessing the performance to EU member states' laboratories, because the point is not that the JRC continues to do this work, but that we develop the technology and hand it over. So we're now in phase 2 between 2014 and 2018, and the results will be available shortly. The glossary, as I mentioned, you have the link here, and you feel free to explore it. We've translated to 24 member states' languages, and it's actually a very nice tool, besides being a very interesting tool for the field practitioner to have in his smartphone as a standalone, does not need internet connection to function, can be downloaded and then can be used in the field without internet connection. It has a very interesting side effect, which is because everything is translated in the 24 languages, it's a very nice training tool because you can quickly have access to technical translations if you're doing trainings with mixed audience with different languages. So this is also an interesting tool to use. It was a collaboration between the JRC, DG Home, and Europol, exactly to have this field practitioners' input. And it has an open and restricted version. The link that you have is for the open. If you want access to the restricted version, you can contact us. And then in terms of explosives, we've done a few interesting things. First of all, we've contributed to the definition of the precursors list. We've developed an inspector test kit for trace explosive detection for it to be applied in the different places where there's trace detection to make sure that the equipment is giving a good response. And we've also developed the first explosive simulant for the to use in different types of X-ray machine technologies. We have done a number of Horizon 2020 collaborations. I have here just 2 examples. One is still running, is the seaboard container inspection project, which is developing an architecture in which we could optimize the time of passage of a container to be detected through different types of detection, RN, but also C detection, all in one passage. And we had the GIFT, CBRN GIFT project, a forensics project. That one already finished, had the last workshop the end of last year in October. And it was a very interesting integrated CBRN forensics project, developing protocols and trainings to make sure that the forensics investigation could handle potentially contaminated CBRN samples. And there we work also at international level. I'm not going to get into more details on that. We work with the IAEA because we have a practical arrangement with them, and we exchange information and we support a lot of their nuclear security actions. And just a little bit more information on the CoE initiative. In terms, so the CoE initiative is running under the instrument Contributing to Stability and Peace, which is a formal instrument for stability, managed by DG DEFCO, which is a large instrument of development and cooperation in security with partner countries. And the centers of excellence are under the last aspect covered there, addressing global and trans-regional threats. They are now a network of 60 countries, partner countries of the EU, and the objective of this initiative is to establish long-term capacity building in security and a sustainable network beyond 2020. The initiative is running in 60 partner countries, all with national focal points and organized under 8 regions, each one with their regional secretariat, and currently managing around 68 projects. This is the Centers of Excellence side of activities. How it works is that all the network comes together for these exercises, of which the most important is the needs assessment exercise, to make sure that we address real needs that are identified from bottom up, and then we help the countries develop their national action plans, which is the roadmap for capacity building for the countries for the next few years. Finally, we can support, and in all these activities, we support a lot the practical application of the capacities that were acquired by means of exercises and field demonstrations. We have partnerships for that with the member states. We had a very recent, very successful exercise on reach-back capacities in partnership with Finland and France, called the Magic Maggiore. We've implemented already twice this co-sinus exercise, which is a very realistic tabletop exercise, knowing that field exercises are extremely time-consuming and expensive. We tried to make tabletop exercises that give really the feeling of a field exercise by making different player teams that are separated in different rooms and receive the injects in a very realistic scenario. And we've organized in 2016, and we're now following up on that, the first nuclear security EU-scale exercise, in which we tried to get really the realistic feeling for how is nuclear security in the EU by having no observers, having only EU member state delegates to discuss very practical issues of nuclear security. And that's it. Sorry. Takes a little bit long because we do a lot of things.
Thank you very much, Margarita, for this comprehensive overview of the JRC actions. I will take one question, if any, and then you will be able to speak with Margarita during the break because we're running a little bit late. Questions? Okay, we're very clear. Thank you. Okay, so we'll proceed with the last presentation, which is about the ERNSIP initiative, which is the European Reference Network for Critical Infrastructure Protection. And Sakari Jantola will be presenting it.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. From the Radis Technologies, please.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm, okay, let's, wait, well, I can start properly anyway. I'm representing a thematic group on radiological and nuclear threats to critical infrastructure, which is actually part of the European Reference Network for Critical Infrastructure Protection, or shortly ERNCIP. F5 might help. Oh. Well, okay, I thought it comes full screen. That's fine. Yes, so, so this ERNCIP radionuclear thematic group is an expert network that addresses different aspects related to the detection of this one doesn't work. Oh, okay, now it works, good. Aspects related to the detection of radioactive and nuclear materials. And for the current 2-year working program, we have decided to have 3 focus points that are novel detection technologies, robotics in radiation detection, and expert support for field teams. In this talk, I will skip these first 2 topics and only concentrate on the last one, which is the expert support, since this is a cross-cutting element that has a large influence on all aspects of radiation measurement. So let me first explain what I mean by expert support. So if we think of a threat that potentially involves radioactive and nuclear materials, we typically have operative units working in field, and these operative units have the radiation measurement capability. Then we also have an operations center, which is typically run by the police force, for example, that coordinates the whole mission. Classically, the radiation experts have been working together with the operative units in field. But now, okay, this goes. Do I have any control on this, or is it controlled by someone else? Okay, yeah, keep this one, thanks. Yeah. Yes, so if we have expert support available that receives data directly from the operative units, it means that we can move a lot of the analysis effort from field to office settings. And I would say there's one huge advantage in here, since probably even the best gamma ray spectrum analysis expert, when working in field, in rain, in a stressful situation, does worse job than a mediocre analyst sitting comfortably in his office. Then the expert support can also communicate directly with the operations center so that it filters the data produced by the radiation measurement team in field. And the operations center only receives data that's relevant for them and in a format that they can actually use. The expert support can also have access to the operative information, in which case the expert support can work closely together with the command and control to actually form a full understanding of the threat. So even though this is fairly simple, this is all something that can be done just like ad hoc, but there are technical requirements like the communication protocols and data formats must be agreed in advance. And then there are also agreements needed between different bodies that they are actually willing and ready to share the information and receive it. So the expert support can help this type of missions in many ways, and we often only think of the detection of radioactive materials out of regulatory control, but there's a lot more needed as well. After the source is detected, it needs to be identified, then it needs to be localized, the material needs to be characterized, so basically this is activity estimation, understanding the shielding around the radioactive source, and so on. And based on all this information, there's the alarm adjudication, which is essential part of the risk assessment, and finally, then the correct response. And all these steps also need quite a lot of training. And one challenge we are often facing is that it's not so easy to get access to radioactive materials with decent quantities for training purposes. And something we have also been thinking of is that good part of the training be done in a virtual environment in a way that we have detector systems that actually produce realistic data, but don't really need real sources to produce it, but they are just simulating different scenarios. So I don't want to go in details through how each of these topics can be improved with expert support, but I would just like to take the number 3, localization, as an example. So there are now radiation detectors coming on market that can pinpoint the direction of the gamma ray source. So basically, they give the angle where the source is. But these type of systems, they can't measure how far from the detector the source is. But if we have multiple of these systems writing the information or sending the information to the same expert support center, the expert support can use the information from multiple devices to triangulate the location of the source and then do first estimations for the activity concentration and so on. So the expert support can also be done internationally so that different countries can provide their expertise to each other. And this is something that was demonstrated between Finland and Estonia in 2017. So there was an exercise or demonstration where all the operations took place in Estonia. So they had their own field teams, they had their own command and control and expert support. But in case that they felt like that they want to have a second opinion, they had a possibility to ask assistance from Finland. And in this case, the expert support center in Finland had access all the same information as what was available in Estonia as well. And then they could directly discuss with the expert support center and see if their views of the situation agree. But this was now just a demonstration, so this is by no means operational at the moment. There are many aspects that need to be solved first, so the systems need to be compatible with each other, and there also needs to be agreement on the state level that this type of information actually can be shared. So that was a quick introduction to one topic that we are discussing in this radionuclear thematic group. If you are interested in our work, please go to that webpage. If you can't remember the address, you can always Google EarnSIP nuclear, and it should show the right page. We have written quite many documents on various topics, especially on this expert support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sakari. Is there any questions for him? Okay, thank you very much. So let me say a few words to close this very interesting roundtable. I would like to thank the speakers for the very interesting presentations. I would like to thank you for your attention and your presence. I would like to highlight 2 points that I think are very important for the research projects, which are not always in the center of the research projects. Which are the links with the practitioners that now are basically forced to be part of the research projects which within the Horizon 2020 projects. I would like to invite the researchers to find the way and the willingness to talk to the practitioners more and more, because much has been done so far, but still much needs to be done in the future. And I am sure that the European Commission with the H2020 project will try always to facilitate this dialogue. Which is very important. The second point, I can mention the excellent example of the Joint Research Center, which is basically the perfect example of policymakers speaking with scientists. This is very important because the feedback from the scientific results, not only the technology development, is very important for the policymakers to steer the future of the research. So I also invite researchers to find better ways to communicate results to the policymakers. And one of the means of communication is certainly this community of users. You can do it today, and we will organize new workshops in the same field. So thank you very much for your attention. Okay, I would like to call the speakers of the second roundtable. You are 4, 5. 5. Hello. Hello. Okay, we can prepare the speakers for the second roundtable, but first we will listen to Mr. Victor Voitas about the CBRN action plan. Please take a seat.
Thank you. Can I have my presentation, please? Thank you. So welcome again. I would like to briefly introduce the action plan. We have a bit of delay, so I will try to be quick with that. So the action plan to enhance preparedness against CBRN security risks, it was adopted as a part of counterterrorism package in October last year. So basically following the Barcelona attack, which was in mid-August, the commissioner decided that we should step up our activities in the counterterrorism area. So that's the whole content of the package. So there were measures to improve the protection and resilience against terrorism. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the action plan on protection of public spaces was the main document, then the CBRN action plan, and there were some other minor parts of the package related to countering radicalization, terrorist financing, as well as recommendations on the implementation of the regulation on explosives precursors. Just a few words of the background. So in 2010, 2015, we had the previous action plan, which was all hazard approach, 124 actions. We were in the middle of the implementation. We were asked by the member states, but the council in their council conclusions in December 2012 to focus on a lower number of priorities, because 124 actions, if you have so many actions, basically you don't have any priority. So it was decided that we should focus on detection. And in 2014, we had a communication on a new EU approach to the detection and mitigation of CBRN-E risks. So the current action plan is building on the achievements of the previous action plan, of course. We have EU Sectra Training Center, which was described before by Margarita. We have a serious cross-border threats to health decision, which probably Antonis will talk about in a moment. Centers of Excellence also mentioned before, and Tristan is here to represent them. When we were preparing the new action plan, we tried to also identify gaps still existing. And we consulted our colleagues from other DGs and institutions, but also member states. We asked them what was implemented from the previous action plan, and we asked what are still gaps that we should address in the future. And here at the bottom, we have three examples of areas identified for further work. So we should deepen knowledge of CBRN risks through regular risk assessment. We should conduct research on lower risk alternatives for CBRN materials. And we should further work on cross-border cooperation and conducting trainings and exercises. Another area which is not mentioned here was, for example, civil-military cooperation. Now, where we come from, let's say, it's of course, there are credible indications suggesting that terrorists may want to use CBRN materials and weapons, and they are developing knowledge. They are trying to gain access to these materials. We heard already about Jean-Luc was talking about chemical weapon being used by ISIS in Syria and Iraq. We saw 2 years ago, for example, in Morocco, Moroccan police dismantled an ISIS cell which was working on rudimentary biological weapons. So there are clear indications that that terrorists are interested in CBRN materials and agents. And also, if you look at the terrorist propaganda, you can see that ISIS is encouraging its followers to conduct low-tech CBRN attacks. So, for example, contamination of food in supermarkets with some chemical or biological agents, which is not, obviously it will not be a large-scale attack, it will not be a very deadly attack, but it can cause a lot of panic and economic disruption, so if it materializes. So these are four objectives of our new, more coordinated and focused approach that we have. Reducing the accessibility of CBRN materials, ensuring a more robust preparedness, building stronger internal external links, and enhancing our knowledge of CBRN risks. These are just a few examples, and I will highlight only those which are perhaps the most important from DG Home point of view, because colleagues from other DGs will talk about their actions in a moment. For example, here we have addressing insider threat. This is the work which we started already almost 3 years ago. Accidentally, the first workshop with member states took place the day that the German wings aircraft was down by a pilot. So it was a clear example of insider threat, not in CBRN area, of course, but it highlighted the need to work on that. We want to see how we can step up exchange of information between member states in order to conduct better background checks, for example. This is the work which is ongoing and will be done more. Ensuring a more robust preparedness. Here is a major role for DG ECO, which I think is not present today, unfortunately. But we want to put a strong emphasis on cross-sectorial trainings and exercises, on cross-border exercises. So we had what Margarita was talking about, the Apex tabletop exercise was a good example of what we want to do. DG Home also in cooperation with DG ECO organized a few years ago an exercise called Arete, which was on our side, let's say there was a special intervention unit from Belgium. And on civil protection side, there were civil protection first responders. So it was a good example of, maybe not a good example of cooperation, but a good learning lesson from us, what more should be done in this area. What we are also very busy now with is a gap analysis on detection of CBRN materials. We have a consortium which develops for us a list of scenarios of CBRN terrorist attacks, and together with member states in a classified setting, we will look at detection capabilities and how these attacks can be prevented. Stronger internal external links. Well, centers of excellence are, of course, one of the major deliverables in this area. But we also want to develop cooperation with key international partners, such as, of course, the United States, for example. And in June, we will have a workshop, EU-US workshop on security of radioactive sources. So where member states will be invited. For the moment, we are thinking to have 2 representatives from each member state, one from law enforcement side, one from the regulator side. So it will be a good opportunity to discuss this issue. Enhancing our knowledge of CBRN risks. What we proposed is to create an EU CBRN security network. We see a stronger role for Europol, for them to develop existing capability to develop even further into knowledge hub on CBRN, which of course requires more resources. Basically, they are already busy with providing analysis, different analytical products, developing trainings and so on, but still more can be done. And Europol is very well placed. They have a network of practitioners from law enforcement side as well. What we also wanted to do is we have an advisory group which is composed of representatives of member states, and the problem that we used to have with the previous advisory group was that it was representing all the way that the action plan was all hazard approach. The advisory group was also, let's say, all hazard, meaning that we had members from law enforcement, we had members from public health, and it's fine because CBRN is a all hazard approach, all hazard topic. But what DG Home wants to do is to focus on security issues. Therefore, we wanted member states to nominate a CBRN security coordinator. Most of the member states already did that, so we will have one person, a contact person for the Commission, but also for other member states, which normally should have a good overview of CBRN relevant activities in a given member state. Of course, it's not an easy task, so we'll see how it will work. And the last point here is using better research. The whole community of users is basically about that, so I will skip this point. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask now or during lunch break, the way you prefer. Thank you. Okay. No questions, so say it. The floor is yours.
So, good morning. I don't know, you hear me? So good morning and welcome to this panel session on policy to policy. So my name is Said Abusar. I'm head of unit of Euratom coordination at the Joint Research Center. And in my unit, we are also coordinating the CBRN activities. So the panel today will try to inform you on what at Commission level we are doing in this field of CBRN-E. When we talk about CBRN, it's also cross-cutting issue in the sense that there is one area where we need to look at the synergies between security and safety. It's really in this field of CBRN. If we talk about synergies between security and safety, also it will open a lot of synergy through these safety windows also. So we need also to keep in mind that security cannot be tackled in isolation way in comparison with other area. But first of all, let me also put this topic of policy in the global context of security. When we talk about security system, at least how we try to tackle it also inside my organization, the security system has three components. Policy, it's very important. You can do nothing if you don't have a clear policy, if you don't have rules, regulations, law, treaties. We can continue with this. There are many elements in this policy issue. And the second element, you need staff, you need people to implement the policy. And here there is issue of training and exercise and many other elements. We can talk about them also later on. And the third component is the technology. Technology can be hard technology or information technology or whatever. So you need policy and you need people to implement the policy using technology. So those are three important components. And if we are weak somehow, it's because sometimes we don't bring these three elements together. Staff is the end user. Policy, it's what shape and frame the system. And the technology it's useless if it cannot be used properly by the staff in accordance with the policy. So this is only one element with 3 components in this complex matrix. And then you need to add to this matrix what we call the definition of the security itself. When we talk about security in general, at least in the nuclear field, and it's certainly the same in the other field, we talk about prevention, detection, and response. So in one hand, you have prevention, detection, response, and another element I mentioned before for the security system, you have policy, staff, and technology. So this matrix is very complex. It means that for the prevention, you need policy, you need staff, you need technology. For detection, the same. For the response, is the same. And my colleagues here with me are, each one is dealing with some elements here in this complex matrix. Matrix detection, we will hear from custom, from TAXUD, how the custom officers are implementing some elements on this matrix, on the detection. And from my colleagues, Antonio, from the health, also this response issue, this link between safety and security in the response, it's fundamental. And another element that I should also highlight here, which is very important, security, it's a global issue and need a global answer. And we cannot work at European level without having in mind this international dimension. Our security here, it's also our security there. And we need always to keep this in mind and to try to do the best to mirror what we do inside Europe, outside the Europe. And Tristan will speak about the Center of Excellence, this EU initiative we are implementing outside the EU border. This excellence came also from what I said before. When we talk about policy, technology, staff, it's a dynamic system because the policies are evolving, the technology is evolving, and then you need also to train always, permanently, frequently, the staff on technology, on policy. And these 3 elements, they should work always on synchronization to reach this excellence. And this is why also we call our initiative Centers of Excellence, because we try to put this policy, this technology, and training, this capacity building on these 3 elements to have them in synchronization, to try to reach the excellence, which also dream and big goal that we all try to reach in this field. And finally, I should also mention it to make it also clear that security is national competence. It's a regalian element in the sovereignty of the states, but at EU level, there are some elements where we can work together. We are in Schengen area, we don't have border. There is movement inside the Europe. There is issue of coordination. There is issue of exchange of information. There is issue of common exercise. There is also issue of developing together technology. The research security program is about this. And there is other initiative. The CBRN Action Plan, it's also element to support at operational level the security in Europe. So without taking too much time, I will give the floor first to Wim to speak about what our colleagues dealing with customs are doing in this area supporting the CBRN-E activities. Wim, and then we will, I think my colleagues will speak about 5 minutes each one, and then we can open the floor to the room and we can have also interaction with you on what they will present.
Thank you very much, Said. Good morning. My name is Wil van Eeswijk. I work for the Director General for Taxation and Customs Union in a newly created Customs Directorate. After some internal reorganization, we have decided to put all the the customs-related business units in one customs directorate, which I think is very efficient, very good. More specific, I work in the risk management and security unit, and I'm dealing mainly with detection issues, control equipment, and that also includes research and innovation. And therefore, I'm very extremely happy to be here with you, because this is typically an area where we need also to engage with others, and more in particular with the research and academics, and also with the industry. Because we are responsible for policy design, but the implementation, the enforcement will be done by the customs administrations, our 28 customs administrations. We have now, there are a bit more than 2,100 border crossings within the European Union, and we have now around 114,000 custom officers. So that means also that to design an efficient cross-border movement system is very crucial, and therefore we need to have state-of-the-art technology, research and innovation. In my short intervention, just to set a bit the scene, I will zoom in a bit on the security mission of customs, because customs have also, of course, the traditional tasks of collecting duties, revenues, and excise, and all that kind of things. But for this purpose, I think it's important to zoom in a bit on the security mission. And their customs have a very crucial role, a key role, would say, in ensuring our external border and supply chain security. And in this way, also, our custom officers, together with us, we contribute to the overall security of the European Union. And we have to do that always in a way that we find a proper balance between custom controls and also the trade facilitation. Because also we want to promote European trade, European competitiveness, so we should not unnecessarily interfere in the flow of goods. So, and if we do it, we need to have good means and reasons to do that. So overall, the key message is, I think, that since 2002, customs is one of the, we are in the front line when it comes to security, to the fight against terrorism, and even organized crime. For the purpose of this community of users, of course, the main aspects and the threats, I would say, where we would like to look at are, of course, of radiation, nuclear, but also for the chemical and the biological material. But this is just a part of customs. We have, in average, we have 11 threat categories. There's also, we have to deal with the drugs. Okay, you can say they can also be chemicals, but it's drugs, it's explosives, it's cigarettes, it's CITES, it's money, it's alcohol, weapons, human trafficking. So that's quite broad what we have to take care of. And customs is also responsible for the enforcement of 60 pieces of different legislation. So it's quite broad what we have to look at. But let's keep it a bit on the CBRN components for my first intervention. And also there, when we work together with the colleagues in DG Home to redesign and to further shape the new CBRN action plan, there are some tasks attributed to DG TaxSud and the customs to zoom in a bit. Partly I do that we have also, one of my working groups is that I'm also chairing a group which is responsible looking into forward thinking of customs technologies. So where we look at, and detection technology, where we look at what do we have now, what do we need, what is commercially available, what kind of threats do we have. And I think it's not a secret for you that threats are not static. They are constantly evolving and changing. The more as law enforcement has a better detection capacity, they will change. They will find something else to do it, or they are looking for other spots in our external border where there might be a weaker detection capacity for certain goods. So where they will try then to find that. One of the things is that we should enhance our capacity to secure our external border for illicit trafficking of any CBRN materials. We will do that mainly on risk-based controls, so make use of data analytics, intelligence, open source research, that kind of things. And one of the things also which I'm also tasked with my detection group is now that we also tasked to explore a bit of the detection capabilities for CBRN materials in global supply chains. And that's also one of the things where later on maybe I will say also have a lunch where people can give me some feedback whether what is already existing in this. We are quite, I think customs is quite well educated and know and have quite a lot of capacity and know to deal how with radiation and nuclear detection. That's also quite static, it's straightforward, it's developed, but to make on-the-spot detections of intercept any threat-related chemical or biological agents, that's much more of a challenge and that's much more complicated. So therefore, if there are, I know there have been some projects have been done in this respect. There might be some future ones, but really I would like to have a bit of your support, feedback in what could you give us to put customs in a better position to make also detections of this kind of materials. And we are trying now to come up to make a sort of a first mapping that we say, okay, what kind of material, what kind of equipment is existing, what can we use, and what are we missing, and what is activities that are ongoing. The second component, but then I'm zooming a bit now on the radiation and nuclear, because that's customs competence in almost in all our member states. So we need to continue to train our custom officers on this in this field. Therefore, we have the luck that already in the first CBRN action plan by DG Home, together with the GRC, they have constructed the EUSECTRA training center in Karlsruhe and ISPRA. We had already a very successful training campaign for custom officers in radiation and nuclear detection, where we have trained custom officers from all our 28 member states and some of the direct neighboring countries. And as this was a success, and this was very oriented to end users, the practitioners, we got internal funding, and we have now agreed on the second training round of training campaign, which will start in 2 weeks. In the 19th of March, we will do the first round, and we have booked another 6 slots in the EUSECTRA between now and the first quarter of next year, and we're going to train customs officers, and we offer now them, they can choose, there's a menu, we have 2 different options. The member states have to indicate whether they want to have basic training, whether they want to have train the trainer, to bring up already experienced people in the member states up to a higher level in order to create a sort of a cascading effect, so that they can train their own officers at national level, and we offer them to book a training slot on special request on specific challenges that member states might have. So that's going to happen. Part of that training curriculum which we are going to do is also to develop a e-learning training for custom officers, which would then also become a sort of prerequisite to future training. And at the long run, and that's something we are developing and we would like to do together with the JRC and Home, is towards maybe 2020 or something, to come to a fully fledged exercise in a radioactive nuclear smuggling incident somewhere in Europe. But that are different steps to take, and also this is discussed in different fora to be followed. We are also very active with our end users, with customs administrations, more and more bring them also into, we did it in the FP7 and also in the Horizon 2020 program, where customs administrations participate as end users. We had one project which is now already finished. It was the Access project, so automated comparison of X-ray images, so saying that we are learning systems, recognizing shape patterns, and we could alert custom officers in case a scan is made and the system the system is taught to expect something, and if there is a deviation, they will alert it to that. Another big project which we are running, which are now going to the end of this year will stop, is the so-called Seaboard project, where we have customs administrations involved, where they have developed and they will test different detection technologies, advanced detection technologies, which will be tested at real border crossings. So the Seaboard project, they have developed detection capacity for advanced new generation radiation nuclear, for advanced X-ray interpretation, artificial sniffer, and also neutron interrogation. And these systems, so you can, and always to be it a bit simplistic, it's a sort of design of a wash street, of a car, and you have different options. And there you go for the full menu. So we pull cargo through all these different pieces of technologies, which are placed in a certain sequence, in a row. And then we're going to see how other detections are made. And we will do that with designed containers, where we have threat material stuffed in a container in different positions with different cargo, so we can see the performance. And we will use commercial cargo to see how this works. We will have 3 different rows of intensive testing. One will be at the Hungarian-Serbian land border. One will be done at the middle-sized European port in Poland. And then the last test will be done in the port of Rotterdam. So we scale it up also to different types of cargo flows. Then we have another project on running, which is Mesmerize. That's a project is related to detecting of threat material, of concealments on the body and inside the body. And that is looking for mainly for explosives. But we also there, we want them to do some tests also for drug-related substances. Now, what's the beauty of this is to have customs involved as end users, and so they interact with the research community. So they can be involved in designing the technical specific requirements. Then things will be tested. They will be tested in a lab. They will be designed, and then customs say, this works, this doesn't work. So it goes back. You do field tests, and it goes back. So there will be a different interaction, different rounds, in order to improve the system. At the end, if this works well, it's already, you build confidence with one of your, now speaking to researchers and developers in the industry, to one of your potential future market parties. So they will have confidence, and it might be easier to sell something. We had also one project related to special nuclearized material and a modular mobile detection, the MODES project. Later on, after the lunch, a representative of that consortium will present, maybe say also something about this project. But there already, after closure of that project, some of the products have already been sold or put in lease. Last thing, what I would say, where we also, from the customer's perspective, in a broader sense, where we have asked for to be looked at specifically for the Horizon 2020 work program, 2018-2020, is that we want to have to come more and more to become to a sort of a automation, integration, validation of systems, so that we can have a fully supervised and validated supervision of our trade flow, and to bring in more their automation and things like that. We are very concerned about what is happening in post and parcel supply chains. This is related also to CBRN materials in smaller quantities, but there I think we are vulnerable. And the problem there with current technology is that there's no technology available which can cope with the speed of how those packages are floating. We can control everything, also with equipment, but it takes time. So that means that if you select a package, it will not go on the plane where it has to go. So there is something where we would certainly need support from the industry. Last thing, that's a huge problem, but maybe for another conference, is that we have serious problems to detect cigarette contraband smuggling in high-density cargo. Also there we are weak and vulnerable. So that's a bit of where we are working on, and I give over now to my colleagues.
Thank you, Wim. You are at the front line of EU border security. I give the floor to Antonio, which is mainly response elements and also the synergy we might have between security and safety.
Thank you very much. So I come from the Crisis Management and Preparedness in Health Unit of DG Santé, and I will try to give you an overview of our work in relation to health, to the work of the EU in the health security area, focusing in particularly on the CBRN activities of DG Santé and the CBRN action plan. So CBRN threats and health emergencies are addressed under the decision 1082 of 2013 on serious cross-border threats to health, which provides a comprehensive, a coordinated approach for preparedness, early warning, risk assessment, and crisis response, and aims at supporting member states to fight serious cross-border threats to health, such as communicable diseases, but also threats from chemical, environmental, or of unknown origin. Under this decision, a number of structures and mechanisms have been developed, and I will try to give you briefly what are these structures are. And first is the Network for Epidemiological Surveillance. The second one is the Early Warning and Response System, the Health Security Committee. Then we have the funding mechanism under the Public Health Program to support member states build capacity and technical assistance provided to them. And then the way the Commission works with other Commission services and international partners. And starting by the Epidemiological Surveillance Network, this is a network that is run by the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, which is placed in Sweden, in Stockholm, and brings into permanent communication the Commission, the ECDC, and the national authorities responsible for epidemiological surveillance. And member states are obliged to communicate through this network information which shall be comparable on a certain number of diseases, the notifiable diseases, which are placed into a list of communicable diseases and related special health issues, as well as on the progressions of epidemics. And this notification is done by using the EU case definitions. We're currently in the process of updating this list of the diseases and the case definitions in order to include recently emerged diseases such as chikungunya, dengue, and Zika, and also update some other case definitions due to the scientific development. The other important tool is the Early Warning and Response System. This is a rapid alert system for notifying alerts in relation to serious cross-border threats to health. And only this kind of threats can be notified to the system. It is specifically described in Decision 1082 what are these threats. For example, a threat that is developing rapidly and has a significant morbidity or mortality, cannot be addressed at national level, and requires a coordinated EU approach. As soon as this information is provided into the system, and the member states are obliged to communicate this information within 24 hours from the moment they became aware of the threat. Through this, the EWRS, which is a permanent mechanism and brings into permanent communication the different authorities of the national member states and the Commission and ECDC, but also this information is communicated to the World Health Organization at the same time as to the member states and to the Commission, is used for alerting purposes, assessing the public health risk, and determining the measures that are required to be taken. So it is a forum, a platform where member states can upload information and share information and exchange information and experience in order to properly address the threat. This system is currently under revision. We try to update this system in order to follow the technological developments, but also to cover a number of other issues, and in particularly to link the EWRS with the other EU rapid alert systems. But also to provide important information on contextual information, situation awareness, and but also information on communication and on preparedness. Depending on the severity of the threat, the Commission may ask the EU agencies to carry out a risk assessment, and if it is a communicable disease, this is done by the ECDC, as well as when the threat is unknown, of unknown origin. If it relates to food safety, it is EFSA, and if none of these agencies is responsible, then we can address this request to the scientific committees of the Commission. And we can have a response, a rapid assessment within less than 24 hours. And these have been tested and works perfectly. Then this information is channeled to the member states, to the Health Security Committee, which I will speak later what is about, and the national competent authorities. In case a member state consider that this risk requires a consultation with the other member states, can request for an urgent meeting of the Health Security Committee which is composed of member state representatives and can take place rather quickly. It takes place in plenary two times per year, physical presence, but we can have audio meetings within 24 hours or less than this. We have focal points at member states level that we can contact them immediately if the situation requires so. And this is a forum where member states consult each other in liaison with the Commission. It's a member states forum, basically, and discuss issues, how to coordinate the national responses, but also how to coordinate the risk and crisis communication to the public, so that there is consistency and coherent information provided to the public, but also to the health professionals. But key to respond effectively to serious cross-border threats to health is preparedness. And in this respect, the Commission supports the Member States to build capacity to implement the core capacity standards of the international health regulations of the World Health Organization, which is an international treaty, and all EU member states have ratified this treaty and is a binding instrument. And we aim to ensure that there is appropriate coordination and interoperability between the different preparedness and response plans at national level. And that's why we promote and support financially sharing best practices, interoperability, the intersectoral dimension, and as I said, the implementation of the international health regulations. There's also an obligation from the member states' part. Every 3 years, they have to inform the Commission and the other member states about the state of preparedness and response planning. The first such exercise took place end of 2015, and the second one takes place currently. Coming now to the coordination with the other Commission services, we have strong contacts with DG Home, DG ECHO, but also with EAS for example, under the EU Joint Framework on Countering Hybrid Threats, DEFCO, ECHO and JRC, under the Sendai framework, and of course RTD. At the international level, this gives you an overview of our cooperation with international partners. I mentioned WHO is a core partner to us, the different EU agencies, member states, the EEA and EFTA countries, but also the Commission is actively involved in the G7 and G20 activities, such as the Global Health Security Initiative, which in fact takes place, the 18th ministerial meeting takes place today in London, and the communique that will be adopted this afternoon focuses on pandemic flu, as this year is it's after 100 years of the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. Last year, this meeting took place in Brussels and focused on response to terror attacks. And coming now to more concretely what DG Santé and the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control do under the CBRN action plan, starting by the exercises and workshops in order to improve preparedness and response capacity to these threats. We had recently an intersectoral tabletop exercise on hybrid threats. It took place on end of January, 30 to 31 of January in Luxembourg. And it was the first EU-wide tabletop exercise on hybrid threats, focusing in particular on health security. And it involved the public health sector, the security sector, and the civil protection sector. It brought together more than 80 participants from member states, from different Commission services, the World Health Organization, and NATO. And it was the first time that NATO was invited to participate as observer in such exercise. And the purpose of this exercise was to raise awareness and improve resilience to hybrid threats. It was run around a scenario that involved the deliberate release of a communicable disease. It involved also cyber attacks in critical infrastructures and cyber attacks in hospitals, which disrupted the whole process of the provision of health services. And the main focus was how these different sectors can cooperate and coordinate activities in order to re-establish the regular business working environment. So in this respect, we plan some future activities, a cross-sectoral tabletop exercise on business continuity during a pandemic. It will take place third quarter 2018. A series of workshops on preparedness and implementation of the international health regulations. The first workshop will take place end of April, and then we plan a training on best practices regarding entry and exit screening. Again, third quarter of 2018. So this is a picture of how the Health Security Committee reacted on the spot during the exercise. In real life, it takes place through a secure environment that we have in DG Santé, a crisis room, and we can have all member states virtually on board, and we can see who participates and how to interact. So other activities include joint actions with member states. The aim is to involve as many member states as possible, and these joint actions are co-funded under the public health program. So for the future, for the near future, this year we are going to launch a joint action on preparedness and action at points of entry, ports, airports, and ground crossings. And we will focus particularly on biological threat, vector-borne threats, and chemical threats. This will be co-funded with a total of 3 million euros. Then a second joint action with 3.5 million euros is underway on vaccination in order to enhance cooperation and build concrete tools to improve vaccination coverage in Europe. This is a first-line priority for Santé, and it was a point that was raised by President Juncker in his speech on the State of the Union. Then another joint action is the EMERGE joint action on efficient response to highly dangerous and emerging pathogens, which is running since 2015 until this year, 2018. But activities will continue in this area under the new joint action on preparedness and IHR implementation, including in particularly laboratory strengthening. Another element that I would like to mention is the joint procurement mechanism that is in place since 2014. A joint procurement agreement to procure medical countermeasures was adopted by the Commission in 2014, and so far 24 member states have joined the agreement. The first successful procurement procedure took place in December 2016, and it was for the procurement of botulinum antitoxin. Currently, a big procurement procedure for purchasing pandemic influenza vaccines involving 18 member states plus the Commission is underway, while there are a number of other countermeasures that member states are interested to put forward under this framework. Coming now to the activities of the European Centre of Disease Prevention and Control under the EU CBRN Action Plan. One of them relates to cross-sectoral biorisk awareness and mitigation training. This is the second time that this training takes place. The first one took place last year in Hungary, Budapest, and with the participation of 14 member states. And this year will take place in Portugal with the next 14 member states, mid of April. Then ECDC is working for the development of a handbook on the threat from bioterrorism. The first part of this handbook will be ready in mid-April. And the last project of ECDC is related to raising awareness and exchange best practices as regards do-it-yourself biology. Already this morning we heard about these products that circulate on the market, and potentially they can be genetically modified and be used for intentional attacks, or we can have accidental contamination with modified viruses or bacteria. So ECDC is working on this, has produced already a risk assessment You can find it on their website of the ECDC, and you can get in contact with the relevant unit in ECDC. That's all. Thank you very much. If you need more information, this is the website of the Commission in relation to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio, for this very comprehensive presentation on the EU health security framework, and it shows also the importance for this panel on policy to policy. There are a lot of cross-cutting activities, and it's important that all the policy sectors inside the EU that also have this interaction between them in order to ensure this continuity in this security system, and also sometimes avoiding duplication and also sharing a lot of best practice. And I'm sure that Tristan, with the EU CBRN Center of Excellence, or what you have heard also from Antonio, there are also some elements that can be useful for the initiative.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here and to share some information and thoughts on how the EU is contributing to export its knowledge, political but also technical. We call it technical diplomacy outside the borders. And outside the borders does not mean very far away necessarily. I'd like to split my intervention in a few points, and we'll try to keep focus on the objective of this panel, which is policy to policy. You already heard quite interesting examples of how EU policies interact with each other. And I will do it with CBRN, and then we'll give you some concrete examples of contribution or current achievements, short-term expectations, and also maybe a few suggestions that could be of interest for you within this community of user context. On the policy to policy, I would like straight away to, not to conclude, but to summarize in one sentence that our main contribution on CBRN-E policy is the new chapter, the specific chapter of the new EU CBRN action plan that has been issued, which is really the place where policies, internal, external, are meeting, and it's much more than a paper, than a communication. It's really recognition from our leaders, political leaders, and from all EU member states that the external dimension cannot be disconnected from the internal dimension when it relates to security, but in this case when it relates to CBRN-E risk mitigation. So contribution to EU policy, yes, this new chapter targeting the need to reflect and to be proactive in reinforcing, in developing, and in actively promoting the links between the EU and the outside world in terms of sharing of best expertise, of sharing of best experiences, of sharing of technical experts, etc. And I will give you some concrete examples that are being tackled for the moment, and which will definitely contribute to that. If we want to take a bit higher level, the CBRN security policy is fully in line with the overall security policy which the EU, but also most countries in the world are facing. And we are all aware that there is a need, and it's recognized that the situation is evolving quite fast, and policies need to react more quickly and efficiently to the challenges, especially the security challenges and the CBRN ones. And that's why the EU CBRN Centers of Excellence initiative is one contribution to this aim, to this wish of our President Juncker to make the EU a stronger global actor, also to respond to the recent new EU global security strategy. And obviously, when we come to more concrete example, the implementation of this revised CBRN action plan from its external dimension. Today, the EU CBRN Centers of Excellence initiative that my colleague Margarita Goulart mentioned this morning is involving more than 60 countries outside the EU. So 60 plus 28 is 88 countries, which is quite significant. They are split in 8 regions worldwide, and they work with a bottom-up voluntary all-hazard approach, which is certainly bottom-up and voluntary, but which is really also pretty much facilitated and I would say conducted, not led, but conducted by the EU expertise inside the institutions, but also mainly coming from each member state in terms of experts, in terms of agencies contributing to the work and to develop this network worldwide. One of the main objectives of the new CBRN action plan is to reinforce this internal-external dimension. We call it the mirroring, internal-external. That's what we are trying to do. And one concrete example is I would say because it belongs to the Horizon 2020 security research funding, it's your e-notice project as an example of mapping of CBRN training capacities, facilities in the EU, which brought our attention because we were starting the same exercise from a different angle a few months ago, and we realized that this very interesting project, thanks to the CoU, by the way, was really interesting to get into, and so we are now synchronizing our efforts to build a kind of e-notice plus approach that would end up with a deliverable, and more than a deliverable, with a process of identifying an inventory of available existing capacities, facilities for trainings, for organizing or hosting tabletops, field exercises, I would not say worldwide, but in the EU and in the neighborhood and maybe a bit behind, because we have in our 60 partner countries already quite strong expertise available in order they are really looking for reinforcing their own expertise. So we will use this this approach to build one active online system to where we will be able very soon, and when I say very soon, it's already within a few weeks, if not or a few months, be able to activate this and to use the information, the references in this large training CBRN training database or inventory to trigger and to connect the request with the offer, whether they are private or public, and coming through our Centers of Excellence network, we are doing this exercise, and we will also provide funding for partner countries to benefit from training facilities in their regions or in the EU. Which brings me to another example I wanted to share with you, which is also quite new, and you mentioned that in the Chimera exercise months ago, for the very first time NATO was formally, NATO representatives were formally invited to integrate this exercise. We are also doing this with the Centers of Excellence initiative, and as an example, a team of 10 partner countries, individuals, experts, were selected last October, and they benefited from a specific high-level training module, in 1-week module in Vyshkov, in the Czech NATO accredited facility, We will continue to do that. We will also be enable a mechanism to allow NATO accredited teams to be deployed in the partner countries where there is an added value to do it there and not inside the EU, and vice versa. Just to give an example, we are not focusing on this center, but this center has a very high potential for not all, but for some of our most advanced countries in the neighborhood in particular. I think about Jordan, I'm thinking about Algiers, Tunisia, etc. I would also like to mention that we are developing in the frame of this CBRN Centers of Excellence initiative, and also to respond or to correspond to what is expected in this EU policy and CBRN Action Plan, further efforts to be closer to the field and organize those kind of tabletop and field exercise which allow us and allow our partner countries to assess, to test, to measure how they can activate their response or their prevention mechanism when we simulate a crisis. So that's why we already saw last year and the year before, and we will even see many more concrete cross-border exercises this year and in the coming years in our partner countries, involving, in the majority of the cases, involving EU or EU experts, EU agencies to help those exercises to be properly well tailored to the region, etc. We are preparing a big exercise, for example, in the Gulf Cooperation countries for next year. We will have one before the end of the year in Central Asia, quite difficult area, but the countries are willing to organize this. We will have a few ones in Africa, and even some of them will be jointly shared as with some of the Horizon 2020 project, by the way, which is a consequence also of first efforts or first exchanges that took place already last year or the year before, thanks to the community of users. And that's where you, the CoU and the CoE meet, for example, and will continue to meet. So that means that this is not done just because it looks interesting to cooperate, but it's done because for the EU we have clear instructions that reinforcing the security in the neighborhood and in the neighborhood of the neighborhood is contributing to the security of the inside the EU, and also there is also another strong element of diplomacy and of trade, which should not be underestimated. And building trust with those countries is difficult, takes time, but we can do it. And the EU has a very special role to play in the current situation where many countries feel a bit lost in the geopolitical context of the world and do refer quite easily to the EU, which is considered as a soft power, respecting their voluntary their approach and not always top-down. So this is a contribution. I would have many other examples in the area of health security. We have a very interesting example, the MEDIPIET initiative, which started 10 years ago through an EU-funded program. At that time, it was DG Sanko. Then it was continued by another department of the EU, and now we are considering to transfer this for the future to another department. It's still always the EU, and a very good example of a very strong network of training the trainers, and in particular epidemiologists in the neighborhood of the EU. And when I say the neighborhood, it's really the whole Mediterranean area and the whole Black Sea. And this is a success story for the EU member states, the EU and those countries, and this will be continued as a EU flagship. And this is also policy to policy. We cannot anymore, and we do not anymore work in silos. You see the example of this table, just a contribution and example, but we definitely need to be more efficient and while respecting all responsibilities to move forward in one direction. Not always easy because also the political situation in the EU is what it is, and we depend on that, but it's making huge progress. The EU CBRN Centers of Excellence is really an EU initiative which is implemented by the European Commission, but which is in very close cooperation with the European External Action Service. So it's really an EU initiative which is fully endorsed by both the Commission and the High Representative, Mrs. Mogherini. I would like to underline that there is, to come back to the mapping that is ongoing, we would really to encourage you and any of you and in your countries to not underestimate the potential of this mapping, this inventory, because you could be contacted to organize a specific training in the future if you are in this list. But this is for the e-notice. You can refer to e-notice, and Mr. Galau is sitting just in the front here. So I promised that I would give you some suggestion. Well, one would be that sometimes when we are daily in contact, not myself, but we have a lot of colleagues, and we have 1,000 officials from the partner countries active in the countries, plus all the EU experts and the EU delegation and EU and member states embassies and projects running in the countries. I see a few project leaders here, by the way, and we could imagine to establish a kind of a quick connection between the COE and the COU when we are facing urgent or important requests, short-term requests on the ground in a specific country for providing a specific service. It happens I would not say every week, but almost several times a month that we are facing a kind of expression of interest or request, and not necessarily for funding, but for expertise. And this week there was a clear example coming from our partner country in the Gulf Cooperation country, in the United Arab Emirates, desperately looking for a strong, efficient, cost-effective provider of training in different fields. One is the paramedics, and another one is nuclear forensics. So immediately we contacted a few of our partners inside the EU, but because we know them, but we may certainly not know all of them. So we could imagine a system of informing, I know, an early warning or quick warning request. I'm just talking as something that should be explored to better benefit from your network for both interest of our partner and from your interest. Another example that could be explored is, just when I saw your slide on the Chimera, we should explore perhaps the possibility of exporting or using this exercise that was carried out very recently, and do it in one of our neighboring region. And then a last one is just to inform you that when we look at the IR policy, we are working this year we are trying to convince our 28 member states to promote CBRN Centers of Excellence, or at least a CBRN resolution for the next United Nations General Assembly in September, where all those elements could be put in, and where the EU has not only spent quite a significant amount of resources, funding, and expertise, but also has achieved quite significant results. And so we will see what will happen, but this is policy to policy also. Thank you very much. I hope I was not too long, and I'm available for any questions.
I thank you, Tristan, on bringing this external dimension to the discussion today. Before I open the floor to the audience, I need also to mention that the panel here is very limited. We could have more colleagues here in the panel. We could have some colleagues dealing with the environment. When we talk about emergency preparedness, environment is an important issue. Colleagues dealing with food safety, agriculture, and last not the least, the colleagues dealing with the trade issue, with export control. Export control, it's the cornerstone in security, in global security issue, non-proliferation, and so on. And they could also bring a lot of information on dual-use goods and so on. And in this regard, I have really to highlight also the importance of the dual use of technology. A lot of scientists, a lot of good scientists, a lot of innovation. But we should also keep in mind this aspect of dual use of the technology when we develop some innovative concepts. Okay, so this said, I think we can open the floor, and I am asking you to put questions to the panel on any elements that was not deeply developed, or any other issue you would like to raise.
Just a question to Anthony from DG Santé. If you have in CBRN, if you have an intentional release with a major incident inside the EU, what is the current policy in terms of coordination? Would it be through DG Santé if it's a bio release with consequence on the health of people? Would it be DG Santé taking the lead? Would it be ERCC? How would be the coordination between both? Who has the lead and who is doing what? It is not, to me, it's not so clear for the moment.
Thank you very much. So, as you may know, the Commission is one organization, and different services cooperate among each other. In case that a risk, a threat, an attack takes place, so the different DGs get in contact. As I said, we have very good contacts with DG Home, DG ECHO, the Secretariat General. And in such a case, the Secretariat General has a leading role in this framework. So the decision will be taken by the involved Commission services, and in fact by the Secretariat General, which service will be on the lead. And this service will take, will have the first word on the coordination. As it happened in Ebola, although it is a health issue, the coordination was taken by DG ECHO and ERCC. It depends on the threat, on the involvement of the different DGs. But be sure that there is a coordination mechanism. Thank you.
And I have a request now to Victor. Tristan highlighted the interest of DEFCO for this mapping and the necessity of mapping the training center, actually not only inside the EU, also outside the EU, although this will not be the task of Inotis, but more the task of DEFCO. But it would be really helpful if we would have the support of DG Home here to involve the CBRN representative in this new organism that you cited, by the way, which is the CBRN-SAG, so Security Advisory Group. If we could have this information of benefit from the information of this national representative who knows better than anyone else what are the national assets, that would probably be a very interesting contribution to this common database that we would like to share.
Thank you. Well, basically what we want to do is a bit broader than just training institutes, but of course this is This is not easy, but perhaps a bit easier task, especially that you already did a lot of work. And regarding the advisory group, we are still not there yet when it comes to representation of all member states, so we are getting there, and there are still like 2-3 member states missing. So it's a bit delayed, unfortunately, but as we discussed it in January, of course, we don't want to duplicate the work that you already did, because that would be a waste of time and resources and so on. And we want to link up with you in order to see what was done and double check basically your results with representatives of member states in the advisory group. So we still have to see how to do it in practical terms, and but we'll do it.
Okay, thank you. And yes, please.
Well, first of all, it's a pity seeing no more first responder here. I'm the first responder, and I think you. 3 almost. Okay. It would be glad for us to find a place where we could find the products we use for our works. All the products that are developed by the European Union programs and similar things. And not always wait for the enterprises trying to sell in us the products. So better for us to look forward what is the possibilities, and we choose one better than they try to send us one. It's very fine to hear about Paul Thomas and his project, because we need training, and no one here possibly, or nearly sure, has seen anthrax. But first responder will have to work with it. So we need something similar to it to work with and make our trainings. So it's fine for us. It's important for all the establishments to get in touch with the explosive and non-disposal CBRN equips in your region, so you see what are the real needs and the needs for training, because we are finally the first one we are going to the place to work. So it's important you contact us and say we need this or this other thing, or we need training more in this area or in this other area. It's important for the health services to contact also us, because when we are working, we are only working and take care of us. In the case of we have a treatment with chemical or any other product, we are prepared, in our case mainly, and also sure that my fellow over there, the police, national police in Spain, is also the same. We are prepared for take care of us, but not for the people we are attended to the threat. So it will be the health services that will have to take care of them, follow that people in the case they have any sickness or similar thing. So it's important for you to contact that and to improve the training between health services, explosive and disposals, and the protection civil, but because in the case we have an incident, we are prepared to assist not all the rest of the people. And we are talking, I'm talking mainly about police, not the army. Okay? Many thanks.
Can I? Well, let's take some questions and then we come back to the questions and the one you raised also.
I was expecting Jean-Luc to say it, so I will speak on behalf of Encircle. Just to mention that the cluster, Encircle, CBRN cluster, the dynamic catalog forum and networks are now operational. So we invite you to register. We will be very happy to register you as practitioners in the catalog, as well as for members of the supplier community in the room and academia. And you have, with this catalog, a first description of all the potential capabilities, technologies, products on the market, and also projects which are starting to be filled. So we would be more than happy to cooperate in order to map together the overall environment. And in addition, we are now implementing some discussion forum and groups which can be either open to all the registered members. You need to be registered. It cannot be anybody. Or you can also create your own circle of discussion. And you can also ask in a question box specific questions to which the community can answer. And that could be a way, of course, to cooperate. And this would help the community to also propose future solutions and to have topics in the calls which answer your questions. So we have a good, I think, a good opportunity, and would be more than happy to help you to join the community.
Thank you for this information. I think myself and my colleagues agree with your proposal. Is there any other question? The last one, please, and then we can conclude because the time is going fast.
Thank you very much. I'm Franziska Hirsch, and I represent the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the Convention on the Transboundary Effects of Industrial Accidents. And I'm wondering if in the different exercises that you conduct, I mean, including at the EU, non-EU border, or beyond the European Union, to which extent you take into account existing, let's say, legal instrument for that for the countries, I mean, such as the convention, which has, for example, provisions on mutual assistance, I mean, further to, naturally, of course, the Union Civil Protection Mechanism and the participating states and the different guidance that exist, like the host nation support guidance. So does this feed into, let's say, testing also the relevant, I mean, procedures and practical approaches? I mean, looking at alignment with, existing legal obligations, or let's say existing approaches to cross-border cooperation that could in future become legal obligations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. I think I will give the floor to my colleagues, and your question may be also put in the context of this CBRN action plan and the need assessment, where we try to align with some of the legal instruments and international convention. Not all of them, probably, but at least those are dealing with safety and security aspects. But before I will say a few words on some points mentioned by the audience. Mapping, it's a very interesting issue, but it's very easy. Whenever we have problem, we start with mapping, and we finish the mapping, and then we are done. And there is a gap between mapping and going to the real work, to the real problem. So we need really to always think about the next step after the mapping, and we should not underestimate the issue. We talk about training, about open access, but there are a lot of problematics that we should keep in mind. Legal issues and financial issues, and all these elements are the capacity of absorption and others that always stopped us at this step of mapping. We are very good on mapping, but the step after, it's very complicated, and we should keep this in mind in order not to raise a lot of expectations that we will not be able at the end to fulfill. Okay, this said. Then in regard to the training at national level for frontline officers, for police, I think this is really related to the response plan of the countries. You have your response plan. In this response plan, there are different responsibilities. What is the role of the police? What is the role of the civilian protection? What is the role of the law enforcement? What is the role? And definitely for each level. In this response plan, you need dedicated training for this. And I give the floor to start with you, Mim, if you want to complement.
Just to reply the question, whenever international convention agreements are taken into account, of course, whenever, I can only speak for the law enforcement community, because whenever they have to exchange any kind of information, it's either based on national legislation, the international and the European legislation we have in place for that, or let's say mutual assistance agreements. So we take that into account, and where we act, of course, for the European side, it will mainly based on European legislation, and of course we do also a lot together with the World Customs Organization when we speak about the global level, and there also we are following, of course, UN conventions and other international agreements and treaties. For the trainings, law enforcement, I can only speak for the customs community, where we are very active in reaching out to them, in asking them whether what are their needs, what are their problems, what are their training needs, and also meeting with them and have them also involved in selection and information exchange on what kind of technologies are out there. So there we have built up quite a good relationship, but I can also imagine that also in the police environment and other law enforcement authorities, similar existing networks would exist. I would expect.
Antonio, and then I give you.
Yes. Thank you very much. So regarding your question on how the people involved from the law enforcement bodies, for example, in relation to health aspects. This is a very important issue, and you correctly raised it because you are amongst the first that you get in contact, for example, at the points of entry with people infected maybe from a serious cross-border threat. Just to mention one example, what happened in the Ebola crisis. Yeah, the EU has developed guidelines and were distributed directed to the first line staff at the entry points. In addition to this, and I presume, and I'm sure it will be repeated in case that there is another issue like this, at least at EU level, and I presume it happens also at national level, but at EU level we have a good example of the Ebola crisis. One other example is the CBRN project, which is a project that is going on since a number of years now. There were two phases of this project for cruise boats, sanitation guidelines, which is very useful in this area. And regarding your question whether other countries beyond the EU member states are involved in exercises that we organize. In DG Santé, it's been quite a long time now that we organize this kind of exercises. Just to mention, for example, the Orion exercise that took place in April 2016, focusing on the consequences of the climate changes to health. More recently, we have in last September an exercise on zoonotic diseases, bringing together the animal side authorities and the health authorities together, and always we invite, apart from member states, the candidate countries, the EA countries, but for example, in the last exercise we had Moldova and Serbia that participate regularly in our work. And depending on the agreement we develop with interested countries, can be invited to this. These countries, the example I mentioned, Moldova and Serbia, they participate in our health program. They contribute into this program, and they are regularly invited. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Not too much, but maybe on the Encircle project. We are aware of this project, and you know that we are corresponding to mobilize our network worldwide to help you, or at least to provide you input. In case it becomes a success, we certainly could consider region by region to have a specific tailored action to reinforce and make use of this EU product, EU project, EU deliverable, EU expertise, EU support. But this needs bilateral discussion. But it's also another example of interconnections that can be done, at least where there is a possibility to exchange interesting information or trade or anything with the external borders. Yeah. On the UN question on testing the opportunity of using legal clauses like mutual assistance, or that could be addressed or assessed during exercise, definitely is a very good idea. We can discuss later during the lunch if you like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And in summary, before concluding the panel, the aim of the panel was to inform on some policy element. As I said before, it's not completed. We have 3 or 4 representatives from the Commission, and we could have other colleagues dealing with some element I mentioned before. So we will give us some elements on how it's difficult for custom officers, poor custom officer actually, when you see how much things the custom officers has to deal with. CBRN, export control, looking to the documentations and so on, and you can imagine how much training one custom officer has to follow in order to be performant. So I think we should keep in mind always this holistic approach, and even when we develop training, we should keep this dimension. Otherwise, the custom officers will spend all his life on training. There's an issue here, and it's very complex, and thank you very much for highlighting this complexity when we talk about the custom officers. And it was also useful, in my opinion, this link you are making between the end user, the custom officers, and the scientific community through the Horizon 2020 Security Research program. And then, of course, it's huge, the EU health security framework, and Antonio also gave some elements of the complexity of this system, starting from risk assessment through preparedness, early warning, and finally some joint actions. And Tristan brought this mirroring effects between what we do inside Europe and outside Europe, and beyond the support we give to the partner countries on enhancing their capabilities and capacities on security. There is also other dimension that we should also keep in mind. There is cultural dimension, there's industrial dimension, and this we should also keep it in mind. Working outside, it's also promoting technology, promoting culture, standards, and other elements. So with this, I would like to thank you all for being patient and listening to my colleagues here in the panel. And I ask you to join me to upload my colleagues here. And with this, we conclude this session. Thank you very much.